It was 1944. The war had devoured Europe. Cities once filled with music and laughter now lay in ashes, and the proud banners of the Reich were reduced to smoke, drifting across a broken continent. From those ruins came a group of young women, nurses, radio operators, clerks, all dressed in faded uniforms that no longer represented victory, only survival. They had served under the eagle of the Third Reich, and now they were prisoners of war. When their ships crossed the Atlantic, silence filled the decks. Some watched the sea, others clutched small photos from home, faces that might already be gone. They had been told that America was a land of greed and arrogance, a place that despised them. They expected humiliation, they expected revenge, but what awaited them was something entirely different. The first shock came the moment they stepped ashore. The United States was untouched by the devastation of war. The air smelled of wheat, gasoline, and summer. Clean streets, bright storefronts, children laughing. It was a world that to them should not exist while Europe burned, and that contradiction alone was unbearable. They were sent to camps in the heart of America, Kansas, Texas, Illinois. Behind barbed wire fences, life followed an odd rhythm. There were barracks, roll calls and guards, yes, but there was also order, clean water, food, 3 meals a day, something unimaginable back home. For women who had seen their cities starve, it felt confusing. They wanted to hate their captors, yet each act of kindness chipped away at the wall of pride they carried within. They called their guards Die Amerikaner, with a mix of fear, resentment, and reluctant respect. But slowly, curiosity began to replace anger. The guards treated them not as enemies but as people. Some even tried to speak German. Others offered magazines or music records. And then came that day. It was a summer afternoon in Kansas, unbearably hot, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer like glass. The guards decided to host a barbecue, something they often did for morale. They set up grills, brought out meat, bread, pies, and something strange, rows of golden corn roasting directly over the fire. The German women stared, puzzled. Then came the laughter. "Corn?" one of them sneered. "That's food for animals." In Germany, corn was not eaten by people. It was fodder, food for pigs, something consumed only during the harshest famines. And yet, here were Americans, strong, smiling, victorious, biting into it with delight. To the German women it was absurd. They laughed among themselves, whispering words of mockery, their pride momentarily restored. But the guards didn't react. Instead, one of them, a young sergeant named John, turned toward them, holding an ear of corn dripping with butter and salt. He smiled. "Try it," he said softly. "You might like it." The women hesitated. None wanted to accept food from an enemy's hand. But the smell was irresistible. The butter melting on the hot kernels released a sweetness they had never known. Helga, one of the quietest among them, was the first to give in. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and took a small bite. Her eyes widened. It was warm, sweet, rich, completely unlike anything she expected. For a moment she said nothing. Then she looked up and murmured, almost embarrassed, "My God, it's delicious." The others burst into laughter, but it was different now. The laughter wasn't cruel. It was human. Curiosity took over, and one by one they each tried the roasted corn. Within minutes, the fence that had divided them, at least for that afternoon, seemed to disappear. There were smiles, small jokes, and the kind of silence that only peace can bring. For the first time, they weren't prisoners and guards. They were simply people, sharing a meal under the vast Kansas sky. From that day on, the mood inside the camp changed. The women no longer turned away when spoken to. They began asking questions. Some even helped in the fields where corn grew tall and golden, the same crop they once ridiculed. Helga began learning English from a guard's wife. Others sewed clothes for local families, tended gardens, or worked in hospitals. Each day, the enemy became a little less frightening, a little more familiar. When the war finally ended in the spring of 1945, the news arrived with a strange silence. Germany had surrendered. The Reich was gone. And with it, the world they thought they understood. The women wept, not only for their country, but for the realization that everything they had believed in had collapsed. They would soon be sent home. But what was home now? Before leaving, many wrote letters to the Americans who had watched over them, simple notes but filled with emotion. Thank you for treating us like humans. You showed us that kindness is stronger than propaganda. Helga left a small folded paper on the barracks table. It read, "Hatred is born from ignorance. Sometimes all it takes to end it is a single ear of corn." When they returned to Germany, they found nothing but ruins, streets buried under dust, families gone, silence everywhere. They had survived the war, but the world they came back to was colder than any prison. Still, they carried something invisible within them, a quiet memory of warmth, laughter, and the taste of peace wrapped in golden kernels of corn. Years later, when asked about her time in America, Helga would smile faintly. She would speak not of fear or humiliation, but of that summer day, of the laughter, of the smell of butter melting in the sun, and of the moment she realized that humanity can survive even behind barbed wire, because sometimes a war doesn't end with treaties or surrenders. It ends in small moments, a shared meal, a kind word, an unexpected smile. And perhaps that's why, to this day, when the wind passes through the cornfields of Kansas, it carries with it the faint echo of laughter. Laughter that once crossed the boundaries of war. A reminder that peace often begins not with victory, but with understanding. When the ships left the American coast, the sea was quiet. For hours, the women stood on deck staring at the horizon, that thin line where the sky met the water, and everything they had come to know was disappearing behind them. The air smelled of salt, iron, and endings. They were going home. But what did home mean now? As the ship moved eastward, they wondered what waited for them beyond the ocean. Letters had stopped coming months ago. Rumors said that the cities were gone, that Dresden no longer existed, that Berlin was nothing but dust. Some prayed. Others remained silent, gripping the railings as if they could hold on to the last traces of the world they had known. When they finally reached Europe, the silence was heavier than the war itself. The ports were shattered, filled with broken cranes and ghostly ships. Children walked barefoot among ruins. Women traded bread for coal, and every face carried the same look, a mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and loss. The prisoners were released into this new Germany, free, but rootless. There were no parades, no reunions, only the slow realization that everything, the homes, the families, the promises, had vanished. Helga walked through what used to be Hamburg. Streets she had once crossed on her way to school were now filled with debris. The church bells were gone. The air was grey with dust. She stood there for a long time, listening to the silence, until the weight of it all forced her to her knees. In that moment, she remembered the sound of laughter, the one from Kansas, the smell of butter melting over fire, and the voice of the American soldier saying, "Try it. You might like it." For reasons she couldn't explain, that memory brought her comfort, not because it was joyful, but because it reminded her that humanity could survive even when everything else was lost. She found work in a small village, helping rebuild what little remained of a school. Her hands, once delicate, became rough with stone and dust. Yet every Sunday she baked something new, cornbread, a recipe she had learned from one of the farmers' wives in Kansas. The children in the village loved it, though none of them knew its story. Across the country, other women who had shared the same captivity followed similar paths. Greta, who once mocked the Americans, married a doctor in Munich and later taught English. Ingrid, the proudest of them all, opened a small bakery and, by irony or fate, became known for her sweet corn cakes. Each carried within her a piece of that distant summer, a story they rarely told but never forgot. The years passed. Germany was split in two, walls rising where streets once connected hearts. The world entered another kind of war, colder, quieter, but no less dangerous. And yet, beneath that division, there remained those tiny, invisible threads of memory, the ones that bound former enemies through kindness. In 1964, Helga received a letter. It came from America, from Kansas. The handwriting was rough, but familiar. "Dear Helga," it began, "I don't know if this will reach you. The camp where you once stayed is gone now. In its place stand rows of cornfields, golden and tall. Every summer, when the sun hits them just right, I remember that day we laughed together. The world was at war, but for a few hours we found peace. I hope you did too." She read the letter again and again. Each word carried her back to that field, that moment. And when she looked out her window, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A small patch of corn growing near her garden wall, planted by the wind, perhaps, or by memory itself. In her old age, Helga would often tell children stories of the war, not of battles or generals, but of people, of the things that kept them human when the world had forgotten what humanity meant. She would tell them about laughter shared between enemies, about kindness stronger than hate, and always, always, she ended with the same line. "Sometimes peace begins with something as small as a meal, and the courage to taste it." When she passed away in 1998, her neighbors found an old box in her home. Inside were a few faded photos, a yellowed diary, and a single folded paper. It was the letter from Kansas. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "Wars end with treaties, but peace. Peace begins when someone decides to be kind." Today, the story of those women is almost forgotten. Their names are scattered in archives, their faces lost in black and white photographs. But if you ever stand in a cornfield in the heart of America and the wind moves through the leaves just right, listen closely. You might hear echoes of laughter from a long time ago, not the laughter of victory, but of recognition. The sound of people realizing for the first time that even in war, compassion can survive. And that sometimes the road to peace begins not with power, but with a simple act, the sharing of a meal between enemies. In the end, it wasn't victory that changed them, it was kindness, shared over something as simple as a piece of corn.